You think freedom is a choice? Not in my family. At just 22, I was told flat out, marry a man I barely knew or be thrown out like trash. I chose myself and ended up homeless. I want you to imagine sitting across the dinner table, staring into the eyes of your parents, the very people who are supposed to protect you, only to realize they've already mapped out your entire life without asking you once what you wanted. That was me. My future wasn't mine. It was theirs. They didn't care about my dreams, my education, or even the person I loved. All they cared about was honor, reputation, and tradition. And when I said no to their plan, they didn't hesitate. In one brutal moment, everything I thought was secure, my home, my money, even my sense of family, was ripped away. This isn't just a story about saying no to an arranged marriage. It's about what happens when choosing yourself means losing everything else. It's about betrayal, survival, and the brutal reality of standing alone when the people who raised you become the very people who try to break you. So buckle up. 'Cause what started as one dinner conversation turned into a nightmare that nearly destroyed me, but also a fight that built me into someone stronger than I ever imagined. From the outside, my life looked enviable. My name is Anya, and if you had met me at 16, you might have thought I was destined for greatness. I was that student who always had a pencil tucked behind her ear, a sketchbook stuffed with pages so full of lines and colors they practically spilled out. While my friends doodled flowers and cartoon characters, I drew cities, whole skylines rising from imagination. Towers that touched the clouds, houses that curved like seashells, bridges that looked delicate but strong enough to hold the world. My teachers noticed. In art class, my drawings were pinned to the wall. My architecture professors later told me, "Anya, you don't just design buildings. You tell stories with space." I felt alive when I created, as if my heart beat in rhythm with every pencil stroke. I didn't just want to be an architect, I wanted to be the architect. Someone who could leave behind monuments people whispered about decades later. But inside my family home, my sketches were nothing more than scraps of paper. My family was old money. Not the flashy, new rich kind that screams luxury cars and gold watches. Ours was the quiet kind, legacy money. Generations of men in crisp suits, each one running the family company like a sacred inheritance. Our last name was practically a brand in itself. When people heard it, they didn't think of art or creativity. They thought of power, control, and business. And somewhere along the line, it became an unspoken law. Every child would grow up to carry that torch. It wasn't written in contracts. No one sat me down with a handbook. But it was there in every glance, every comment, every choice they made for me. It hung in the air, heavy and invisible, like the walls of a gilded cage I didn't yet realize I was trapped inside. First, the control was so subtle it almost looked like love. When I was 12 and begged to go to an architectural summer camp, they smiled and said, "Sweetheart, you'll have time for hobbies later. But for now, why don't you try this business leadership program instead?" When I was 14 and won a local competition for my design of an eco-friendly community center, my father clapped politely and said, "Impressive, Anya. You'll make a great head of operations one day. You clearly think like an entrepreneur." At 16, when I showed my mother a scholarship brochure from one of the top architecture schools in Europe, she stroked my hair and said, "That's nice, darling. But wouldn't you rather study closer to home? The business school here has stronger connections. Architecture can always stay a passion." They disguised control as concern, manipulation as love. And because I loved them, I didn't resist. I convinced myself they were right. Architecture could be a dream. Running the family business would be my reality. After all, didn't I owe them everything? Clothes on my back, the roof over my head, the opportunities most kids only dreamed of? But little by little, I felt the weight. I noticed how my sketchbooks gathered dust while my textbooks on finance and corporate strategy piled higher. I noticed how at family gatherings, Relatives praised me not for my designs, but for being the future face of the company. I noticed how every opportunity they gave me, whether it was a networking dinner, a summer internship, or a speaking event, was carefully chosen to shape me into the successor they wanted, not the creator I longed to be. Strange how cages can be beautiful. Mine was golden. I had luxury. I had status. I had a path paved so smoothly I never had to stumble. But inside I was suffocating. Till I smiled. I obeyed. I told myself this was just what it meant to be part of a family. Maybe architecture could stay a quiet dream, a secret world only I knew about. But here's the truth no one tells you. When people control your small choices long enough, one day they'll try to control your biggest one too. And when I finally dared to say no, I would find out just how fragile the love of my family really was. 'Cause those same parents who gently pushed me away from design workshops and into boardrooms would one day shove me out of my own home when I refused to marry the man they chose. And that was when my golden cage shattered and left me standing on the cold, unforgiving streets of reality. I still remember the exact day the letter arrived. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with a gold crest stamped into the corner. My heart pounded the second I saw it, because I already knew what it was.
I had applied in secret. Late nights, after finishing assignments for my business classes, I would pull out my hidden sketchbook and portfolio. I poured my heart into those drawings, into the essays that described my dream of shaping the world through architecture. It was the one act of rebellion I allowed myself. A hope so fragile I barely dared to speak it aloud. And now there it was, the acceptance letter. A full scholarship to study architecture at one of the most prestigious universities in Europe. Not just any program, the kind that produced world-class architects whose work defined skylines. I couldn't breathe as I read it. It felt like the universe had finally whispered, "Anya, this is your chance. This is your escape." But when I showed my parents, the room went silent. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. And then came the words I had feared but already expected. "Anya, this is not the right time. Not the right time." There was always a reason, always an excuse. This time, the reason was critical. The family business was facing what they called a turning point. A major deal was in motion, one that would secure our legacy for decades. They needed me, my youth, my fresh perspective, my face, to represent the future in front of investors. They framed it beautifully. They told me I was essential. They said this was bigger than me, that it was about generations past and generations yet to come. They reminded me of the sacrifices they had made, the comfort and opportunities one had been given, the thousands of families who depended on our company for their livelihoods. And then came the emotional blade they knew would cut deepest. Do you really want to throw all of that away for a childish dream? For sketches? I wanted to scream that architecture wasn't childish, that it was the only thing that made me feel alive. But their voices overlapped, calm yet crushing, as if they were weaving a net around me. My mother pressed my hand and whispered, "We're not saying no forever. Just help us through this, and then you can pursue whatever you want. This is temporary. 1 year. 2 at most. You'll still be young enough to follow your passions after. Temporary." That word wrapped around me like silk. Smooth. Comforting. A promise I wanted desperately to believe. I looked at the scholarship letter again, trembling. It was a door opening to the unknown. Across the world. Away from everything familiar. Away from security. Away from family. A path filled with risk, struggle, and uncertainty. Then I looked at my parents. Their eyes didn't see me. They saw the successor they had been molding my whole life. But they were my parents. The people who raised me, fed me, clothed me. The people I was terrified of disappointing. So I folded the letter. I tucked it away. And I told myself what they wanted me to believe, that choosing the family path didn't mean giving up my dream forever. Just pressing pause. Just a detour. I told myself I could endure the endless boardrooms, the networking dinners, the suffocating legacy. I told myself it was safer, smarter. I told myself I was being loyal, dutiful, good. And for a while, it was easy to believe. The family path came with comfort, an apartment paid for, a car, financial security, the illusion of stability. While my friends scraped by on part-time jobs and student loans, I had everything handed to me. Everything, except the one thing I wanted most. The truth? That was the day I betrayed myself. I chose them over me. I chose guilt over freedom. I chose the paved road over the one that scared me. And I didn't know it then, but that single choice, folding that letter, tucking it away, wasn't a detour. It was the first step toward a cliff I would eventually be pushed off. Because when the day came that I finally tried to claim my dream again, my parents would make sure the cost wasn't just losing a scholarship, but losing everything. When I first said yes to helping my family, I convinced myself it was temporary. 1 year, maybe 2. Then I'd take my scholarship deferred, or apply again, or at the very least, return to my sketchbooks. That was the story I told myself as I traded my pencils for spreadsheets, my late-night sketches for late-night strategy meetings. But time has a way of blurring lines. 1 year became 2. 2 became 3. Before I knew it, my life no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the business. It started small, just like before. Anya, could you sit in on this investor meeting? It'll only take an afternoon. Anya, can you draft this proposal? You're so good with words. Every task was framed as temporary, as if I were simply filling in until someone else could take over. But that someone else never came. Instead, I became indispensable. My phone buzzed at all hours. I managed logistics for international shipments. I reviewed financial reports with accountants twice my age. I stood at podiums, smiling in designer suits, reciting scripts written for me. And while my calendar filled with board meetings, my sketchbook stayed empty. Weeks passed without a single drawing. My hands, once smudged with graphite, were now stained with ink from signing contracts I didn't believe in. The strangest part was how easy it was to pretend I was fine. My parents praised me endlessly. "You're such a natural leader," my father would beam at dinners. "See, architecture was just a hobby. This is your true calling." And for a while I nodded along. I told myself I had control. That any day now, I could walk away and return to my dream. That this was still a detour, not a dead end. But then came the reminders, quiet, cutting reminders of what I had lost. One evening, scrolling through social media, I saw a post from a former classmate. She had just won an international award for a sustainable housing project in Nairobi. Her photo showed her standing in front of the building she designed, her smile radiant, her name etched on the plaque behind her. Another friend sent me a message, asking if I was still drawing. He had just been accepted to a graduate program in architecture in New York and wanted to collaborate someday. I stared at his words, fingers frozen over the keyboard, unable to type back the truth. No, I don't draw anymore. Every success of theirs felt like a shadow I should have been standing in, a future that should have been mine. And yet, there I was, drafting quarterly reports, managing crises, appeasing investors who barely remembered my name. The material rewards were undeniable. I lived in a luxury apartment my peers could only dream of. I drove a car they couldn't afford, wore clothes that looked impressive at galas and networking events. But none of it filled the hollow ache inside me. At night, in the silence of my immaculate apartment, I would open my old sketchbook. The pages were yellowed now, the drawings faint, as if time itself was erasing the girl who once believed in them. Sometimes I would try to draw again, but the lines came out stiff, lifeless. My creativity felt trapped, suffocated by years of suppressing it. I would stare at the page, tears blurring my vision, until I finally closed the book and shoved it back into the drawer. That was when the realization began to creep in, the quiet, suffocating truth. This wasn't a detour. It was my destiny now. My parents had never meant for it to be temporary. That had only been a story to make me compliant, to soften the edges of their control. And in my eagerness to please them, in my fear of disappointing them, I had let them steal years of my life. The resignation came quietly, not in one dramatic outburst, but in the slow erosion of my spirit. I stopped telling myself I'd go back to architecture someday. I stopped daydreaming about the buildings I'd design. I stopped fighting the cage because somewhere deep inside, I believed it was unbreakable. I smiled when people congratulated me on success. I played the role of the dutiful daughter, the polished businesswoman, the heir to a throne I never wanted. But every night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew the truth. I had bartered away my freedom for comfort, my passion for approval, my dream for security. And the cruelest part, even with all the wealth, all the praise, all the stability, I had never felt poorer in my life. What I didn't know then was that this quiet resignation, this illusion of control, was only the calm before the storm. Because soon my parents would demand something far greater than my time or my career. They would demand my very future, my marriage, my body, my life. And this time, I wouldn't be able to pretend it was temporary. There's a certain kind of ache that doesn't scream. It whispers. A dull, persistent hum that follows you everywhere, reminding you of a life you could have lived. For me, that ache was architecture. It haunted me in the quiet moments, in the pauses between board meetings, in the silence after I hung up on yet another call about quarterly targets. I would catch myself staring at buildings on the street, not as a businesswoman calculating their market value, but as the girl who used to sketch them endlessly, who saw stories hidden in every curve of glass and steel. Sometimes I'd play a cruel game with myself. What if? What if I had accepted that scholarship? Would I be standing in a design studio in Paris right now, hunched over blueprints with ink-stained fingers, laughing with peers who spoke the language of creativity? What if I had pursued my dream with the same relentless dedication I now gave to the family business? Would one of those award-winning designs, splashed across magazines, belong to me instead of someone I used to study with? The what-ifs didn't just sting, they hollowed me out. They created a shadow version of myself, a parallel Anya who had been brave enough to choose differently. And every time I saw the successes of my old classmates, photos of their projects, features in architecture journals, I was reminded of the version of me that could have been. But my family didn't see any of this. To them, I was thriving. A success story. The polished heir who stepped into meetings with poise, who secured contracts, who made them proud at every gala. My father boasted about me to colleagues, praising my business acumen. My mother smiled at me during dinners, telling relatives how proud she was of our Anya, the backbone of the company's future. They thought they had saved me. They believed, in their hearts, that they had guided me away from foolish dreams and toward stability. They saw every material comfort I had and mistook it for happiness. And why wouldn't they? I never let them see the cracks. I wore the right clothes, said the right words, played the part flawlessly. I laughed when expected, nodded when praised. On the surface, I was everything they had ever wanted. But underneath, I was unraveling. The scars didn't show, but they ran deep. The first scar was identity. Who was I, if not the girl who dreamed of shaping skylines? Without architecture, without my sketchbook, I felt like a hollow shell, an actress playing a role written for her. Every time I introduced myself at business events, a small voice inside whispered, "This isn't who you are. This isn't your name." The second scar was creativity, or rather the absence of it. Suppressing my passion was like suffocating a vital organ. Ideas still came to me, snippets of designs, flashes of inspiration, but I locked them away because there was no room for them in the life I lived. The more I ignored them, the dimmer they became, until even my imagination felt foreign. The third scar was resentment. Silent, corrosive resentment, not just toward my parents, but toward myself. I resented them for steering me, manipulating me, convincing me their path was the only path. But I also resented myself for being too afraid to fight harder, too eager to please, too weak to choose differently. This resentment festered quietly, poisoning even the moments that should have felt like triumphs. Every deal I closed, every investor I impressed, every compliment I received, none of it filled me. None of it mattered. It was all built on a foundation of sacrifice I never truly chose. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stand at my apartment window, staring at the city skyline. The buildings looked beautiful under the moonlight, glowing like monuments of possibility. And every time the thought would return, I should have built that. I should have left my mark on this world. Instead, I'm just keeping someone else's legacy alive. But in the morning, I'd put on my suit, plaster on my smile, and step back into the role. Because that's what was expected of me. Because my family truly believed they had done me a favor. Because even as my soul ached, I didn't want to face the war that would come if I admitted the truth. And so, the scars stayed invisible. To the world, I was successful. To my family, I was their pride. But to myself, I was a ghost, haunted by echoes of what might have been. What I didn't know was that these silent scars, this quiet unhappiness, would soon be dragged into the open. Because the day was coming when my family would ask for something I could not, would not give. And when I finally said no, all the cracks I had hidden for years would burst wide open. And that's when everything, the love, the legacy, the illusion, would shatter. When I look back now, the pain of what happened isn't just about being cut off, or about the nights I spent without a roof over my head. It's about something much deeper, the realization that sometimes love can come at a cost. And the price of that love, when it's tied to conditions and expectations, can be your very sense of self. My parents believed they were protecting me. They told themselves that by steering me toward security, they were saving me from failure. But what they didn't understand is that their version of saving was also a form of stealing. They stole time I'll never get back, dreams I'll never fully reclaim, and a part of me that will always wonder what life might have looked like if I had been free to choose from the very beginning. And that brings me to something bigger than just my story. Because if you're watching this, maybe you've felt it too. Maybe you've lived under the heavy hand of love disguised as control. Maybe your parents, teachers, or even friends made choices for you, small ones, subtle ones, that shifted your entire path without you realizing it. It's easy to look at someone's life from the outside and call it successful. The good job, the stable income, the picture-perfect appearances. But what does any of it mean if inside you're hollow? If every achievement feels borrowed, as though it belongs to someone else's vision for you, not your own? Success is a tricky word. For my family, it meant money, reputation, legacy. For me, success was supposed to mean creating something beautiful, something lasting, something that carried my fingerprint. But when those definitions clashed, I gave up mine for theirs, and I paid the price. And so I want to ask you, what does success really mean to you? Is it about the title on your business card, the balance in your bank account, the approval of those around you? Or is it about waking up every morning and knowing you're living a life that feels authentically yours? Because here's the hardest truth I've learned. External achievements mean very little if they come at the cost of internal fulfillment. You can have the car, the apartment, the praise, and still feel like a stranger in your own skin. And until you confront the unseen forces that shaped you, family expectations, cultural traditions, societal pressures, you may never truly know if the life you're living is the one you chose, or the one chosen for you. That's why my story isn't just about an arranged marriage, or being cut off, or ending up homeless. It's about the quiet ways our lives can be rewritten before we even realize it. The detours that aren't really detours at all, but cages disguised as safety. The subtle compromises that add up until one day, you wake up and realize you've lost yourself. But here's the hope. Recognizing it is the first step to breaking free. Seeing the invisible strings is the beginning of cutting them. No matter how far you've been steered from your dream, no matter how long you've walked a path you didn't choose, you can still pause, still ask, whose story am I living? And if the answer isn't yours, you have the power to change the ending. So as I close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with a mirror, not a monologue. Ask yourself, have I been living a version of life designed by someone else? Am I measuring success by my own values or by expectations placed on me? And if I could go back and make one different choice, what would it be? Because maybe you're not sitting at a family dinner table with an ultimatum. Maybe you're not being forced into a marriage or cut off from wealth. But in some way, big or small, we all face the echoes of expectations. And the courage to face them, to question them, to redefine them, that's the real act of rebellion. So what about you? Would you have agreed to the marriage just to keep your family's support? Do you think I went too far by walking away completely? Or do you believe freedom, no matter the cost, is worth everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories. Because this isn't just my downfall and my rise. It's a universal mirror. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing what we've lost, we'll also learn how to finally take back what's ours.